What if I told you a single storm could knock out the internet? GPS, even electricity.
And not a hurricane or a blizzard, but a storm from the sun.
A solar storm.
Exactly.
Today we're going to dive deep into how these solar storms could, well, potentially disrupt or even end modern civilization.
Scary thought.
Welcome to Xul Podcast, Shooting the Reality.
Where we take complex topics and
Break them down.
make them make sense.
I'm James Carroll.
And I'm Emily Laura.
And today we're facing a reality that is, well, fascinating and, I'll be honest, kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
The world of solar storms.
Yeah.
We've got a whole stack of research here from scientists and engineers, people who are really trying to understand these events and prepare for them.
Yeah, and it really highlights how dependent we are on technology.
And how that could backfire.
In a big way.
Okay, before we get into the doomsday scenarios, let's start with the basics.
Sure.
What exactly is a solar storm?
Well, imagine a giant explosion on the surface of the sun. A sudden burst of energy, and this energy sends radiation and charged particles out into space.
Okay.
That's basically a solar storm.
So what causes these explosions? What's going on?
It all comes down to the sun's magnetic field.
Okay.
And it's incredibly complex. It's constantly changing.
Okay.
Think of it like a giant fiery rubber band, and it's constantly twisting and snapping.
Right.
And every time it snaps, it releases this enormous amount of energy.
So it's not just the heat and light that we get from the sun. It's this invisible kind of magnetic chaos.
Yeah, it's this magnetic chaos that can really wreak havoc here on Earth.
And it's not just one giant burst, right?
Yeah.
There are different types.
Different types of solar storms, yeah.
With different consequences.
Exactly.
Okay, give us some examples.
Okay, so two of the main ones we need to worry about are solar flares and coronal mass ejections, or CMEs.
Okay.
Now, a solar flare is like a sudden flash of light, a burst of radiation that travels at the speed of light. A CME, on the other hand, is slower, but it's a massive cloud of charged particles.
So the solar flare is like the warning shot and the CME is like the cannonball.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
Now, luckily, the Earth has this natural magnetic field, acts like a shield, deflects most of the sun's radiation.
Okay, good.
But when a CME hits,
Yeah.
it's like slamming a battering ram into that shield.
Oh.
So what happens when that shield gets slammed?
Yeah, I mean, how does that affect us down here?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The interaction between a CME and the Earth's magnetic field, well, it creates these really powerful electrical currents.
Okay.
And they can flow into our power grids
Wait.
and other infrastructure.
Are you saying these solar storms could actually knock out power grids? Cause blackouts?
They can, and it's not just theoretical. It's happened before.
Okay, like when?
Well, take the Carrington Event of 1859,
Oh yeah, the Carrington Event.
the largest geomagnetic storm ever recorded.
I've heard about this one.
Telegraph systems worldwide went haywire. Some operators got electric shocks. Telegraph paper caught fire.
Wow.
And some systems even worked without batteries.
What?
Imagine what that would do to our technology today.
Okay, so now I'm getting a little nervous, but that was back in the 1800s.
Right.
Our technology is a lot more resilient now.
Well, that's the scary part.
Oh no,
Technology's advanced, but we're way more dependent on it.
you're right.
Think about everything that relies on electricity, power grids, communications, transportation.
Everything's connected.
Exactly. And that makes us incredibly vulnerable to what
Yes.
are called cascading failures.
Okay.
One system goes down, it triggers a domino effect.
Oh.
You have widespread disruptions.
So it's not just about losing power for a few hours.
No.
It's about a complete societal breakdown.
Potentially.
Weeks, months, even years without power in major cities.
That's right.
This is starting to sound like a disaster movie.
Well, it might sound like science fiction,
Yeah.
but it's a very real threat.
And we've had close calls recently, haven't we?
Yeah, even in recent history.
Yeah.
In 1989, a geomagnetic storm hit Quebec, Canada,
Okay.
caused a 9-hour blackout for 5 million people.
9 hours.
And that was just a relatively minor storm.
Wow.
It was nowhere near as powerful as the Carrington Event.
So it's not just hypothetical.
No.
It's a real danger
It is.
that we need to be prepared for.
Absolutely.
And to make matters even more interesting,
Oh, yeah.
we're actually approaching the peak of the sun's 11-year cycle, right?
Yeah,
The solar maximum.
that's right.
So does that mean a major solar storm is inevitable?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
It just means the probability of a strong solar storm increases during this period.
I see.
It's like hurricane season.
Okay.
We can't control when or where a hurricane will hit, but we can prepare for it.
So what are we doing to prepare for this potential solar hurricane? I mean, do we even have early warning systems?
We do.
Okay.
Organizations like NOAA and NASA are constantly monitoring the sun, developing these sophisticated forecasting models.
So, like space weather forecasters.
Exactly.
Okay.
They issue watches and warnings, give us lead time.
That's good.
But there's still a lot we don't know about space weather.
Like what?
Well, predicting the strength and direction of a CME, it's still a major challenge.
Okay.
We might get some warning, but it might not be enough
Time.
to take the necessary precautions.
Okay, so this is really fascinating, but also pretty terrifying, because it sounds like there's a lot that could go wrong.
There is.
And there are things we can do to mitigate these risks.
Right.
It's really kind of scary when you think about it.
It is.
It makes you realize just how fragile our technology is.
Yeah, especially with how interconnected everything is these days.
That's right. Everything relies on something else.
It's a double-edged sword, that interconnectedness.
Right.
I mean, it's made our lives incredibly convenient, but it's created this vast network of dependencies that could just unravel.
If one thing goes wrong.
With a single disruption.
It's like a house of cards.
Exactly.
Just waiting to topple.
And to really understand the threat, I think we need to look beyond the power grid.
Okay.
Take GPS, for example.
Right.
We rely on it for everything, from navigation to financial transactions.
Oh, wow.
Even timing the internet.
I never thought about that.
A Carrington-level event could disrupt GPS signals.
Really?
It would cause chaos.
Wow.
In everything from cell phone networks to stock markets.
So even if some areas keep the lights on, we could still lose the internet.
It's possible.
It's like a digital dark age.
And that's just the beginning.
Oh, no.
Think about the internet itself.
Okay.
Global network of undersea cables, terrestrial cables.
Wow.
A major solar storm could induce powerful currents in those cables.
Okay.
Sever connections.
No way.
Isolate entire continents.
So no internet, no communication.
Potentially, yeah.
This is catastrophic.
That's why understanding these cascading failures is so crucial.
Yeah.
A disruption to GPS, for instance, it could impact telecommunications.
Right.
Aviation, emergency services, the financial sector.
Oh, my God.
The list goes on.
One of the articles I read talked about the 2012 near miss.
Yeah, that was a close one.
A massive CME.
Barely missed Earth.
Scientists estimated that if it had hit, we'd still be recovering.
Decades of setbacks.
It really puts things into perspective.
It does.
So are we doing enough to protect ourselves?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
The reality is we're facing some serious challenges when it comes to preparedness.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is forecasting.
Right. You mentioned earlier that scientists are getting better predicting space weather, but it's still a young science.
Very young. I mean, we can monitor the sun, see when a CME erupts, but accurately predicting its strength and trajectory, it's still a work in progress.
Okay.
It's like hurricane forecasting,
right,
but on a much larger scale.
Higher stakes.
And just like with hurricanes, there's a margin of error.
We might get some warning, but it might not be enough time.
Exactly. And even if we could predict these storms perfectly, what could we do?
That's true.
I mean, we can't just build a giant Faraday cage around the entire planet.
So is there any hope?
There is.
Okay.
There are a number of mitigation strategies we can employ.
Okay, like what?
For starters, power companies can install devices that protect vulnerable equipment, like transformers.
Yeah.
They can also adjust grid loads to minimize damage.
Okay, makes sense.
But it's also about thinking long-term, building more resilience into our systems.
What do you mean?
Well, like navigation, for example.
Okay.
Right now, we're so reliant on GPS.
Huh?
What if we invested in alternative systems?
Like
ground-based radio navigation. Those wouldn't be affected by solar storms.
So it's about having a backup plan.
Exactly, a plan B.
Okay.
And it's not just about technology.
Right.
It's about educating the public.
What do you mean?
Making sure people understand the threat and know what to do in case of a major solar storm.
Have a plan.
Exactly. We need to be prepared for the possibility of widespread disruptions.
Right.
Have plans in place to cope.
You know, one of the articles I read mentioned the Army bringing back orienteering.
Really?
And the Navy teaching celestial navigation again.
That's interesting.
It's kind of cool, actually.
It is.
It's a reminder that sometimes the old ways are the best ways.
Yeah, especially when technology fails.
Exactly.
It highlights the importance of not being overly reliant on any single technology.
We need to diversify.
Exactly.
Have backups. Be prepared to adapt.
Absolutely.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. What stands out to you as the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
I think the key message here is that we need to start thinking about solar storms not as a hypothetical threat,
Right.
but as a very real possibility
And we need to start preparing now.
before it's too late.
It's been a pretty sobering conversation.
It is a sobering topic, but I think it's important to remember that while the worst-case scenarios, the ones we've discussed, are unlikely,
Yeah.
they are possible.
I think that's what I found most surprising,
Yeah,
how unprepared we seem to be.
yeah.
I mean, we've known about this threat for decades, but it feels like we're just starting to take it seriously.
It's that classic case of a low-frequency, high-consequence event.
Right.
It hasn't happened recently, so it's easy to dismiss.
Yeah.
But a Carrington-level event,
Yeah.
it could happen anytime.
And the impact would be devastating.
Devastating, especially with our interconnected world.
So where do we go from here? What can we do to raise awareness?
Well, for starters, keep the conversation going. Podcasts like this, articles, public forums, just getting people thinking about the issue.
But it feels like such a big problem. Where do we even begin?
It can feel overwhelming, but every step we take,
Yeah.
no matter how small, it makes a difference.
Right.
It starts with awareness and then taking action.
Right.
Advocating for policy changes,
Okay.
investing in protective technologies,
Yeah.
or even just having a plan
Right.
for a long-term power outage.
Yeah, have a plan.
Be prepared.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into solar storms.
Fascinating topic.
It is and a little scary.
A little bit.
But don't forget to subscribe to Xul Podcast, Shooting the Reality.
For more deep dives into the topics that matter,
We're always shooting the reality.
we are.
Leave a comment below with your thoughts. And until next time, stay curious.